This happened when I was 22. I'm now in my 30s. At the time, I was preparing applications for grad school, so after work each evening, I would go to the local university library and stay until closing, which was 11 p.m. I took the subway to my neighborhood and decided to make a quick stop at the nearby 24-hour grocery store to get some things for a late-night dinner. I bought my items and was back outside waiting at the crosswalk for the light to change so I could cross the street. There were at least 2 other people waiting at the crosswalk as well. I lived in a major metropolis, and so there were almost always other people around at whatever time of night or day. Suddenly, a man comes running from out of nowhere and stands next to me, now also waiting at the crosswalk. He was middle-aged, about 5.7 feet, and had a slim build. I thought that maybe he just wanted to make sure he would make the light and not miss the chance to cross. However, as we are crossing the street, I notice that he starts to make some odd movements with his legs. I don't really know how to describe it other than to say he was kind of tripping himself up and drastically slowing down, so that he went from walking in front of me to suddenly being directly behind me. To be honest, my first thought at the time was racism. I have a very petite and feminine build, looked very young, and was clutching library books in my arms, but I am also a black woman. I truly thought that he was scared to have me walk behind him. It never even entered my mind that I might be the one in danger. I simply noted his behavior, laughed it off, and then forgot about him. On my walk home, I passed a small convenience store that I frequented for inexpensive fresh produce that was also open 24 hours. I decided to make a quick stop and get a few more items for dinner. I was in the store for maybe 5 minutes and had truly forgotten about that man from the crosswalk. Except, when I exited the store, he was standing outside. I was so startled. It looked like he had been waiting for me. My heart started to pound in my chest and I was going into survival mode. As soon as I passed him and continued walking home, he also started walking, following right behind me. I could hear his steps and sense him nearby. I needed to make sure that he was really following me so that I could plan my next move. I could see the entrance to the subway just ahead of me. I decided I would duck into the subway station to see if he followed me in, but, more importantly, to ask for help from the ticket collector. Unfortunately, when I went into the station, the ticket collector was not in the booth. The station was completely empty. No commuters either. I spontaneously decided to hide against a wall to the left where I could not be seen from the street entrance. 30 seconds later, the man walked into the station so nonchalantly he was almost skipping as he headed right to the turnstile, as if it was his plan all along to take the train. However, at the last minute, he looked behind him and saw me standing there against the wall. As soon as he saw me, he stopped, turned completely around and walked out of the station, no longer intending to go down into the subway. I knew I was undeniably in danger. I took out my phone and called my roommate Tim, praying he was home and would pick up. He did. I explained in a panic what was happening. "Are you home? Can you come get me?" I asked. Tim asked me if the man was still there. I carefully peeked around the wall to look out to the street. There was the man. He was standing, smoking and laughing with some guys. He was literally making friends as he waited for me outside the station. I told Tim, yes, the man is still there. A train must have arrived downstairs in the subway, because at that moment there was suddenly a bunch of people coming through the turnstile and exiting the station. Tim and I agreed that I should leave the station in this crowd of people, stay on the phone with him, and he would meet me on the street. Essentially, we would walk towards each other. Our house was only a 5-minute walk away on the same street as the station. When I left the station, I had to pass the man. He saw me in the crowd. I saw him throw down his cigarette, and then from behind me, I heard him say to the men he had been talking to, "I have to go." He continued to follow me. I told Tim everything, since we remained on the phone. I tried to walk as quickly as I could, but there was snow and ice on the sidewalk. I don't know why I didn't alert any of the other people who had exited the subway station and were now walking with me on street. It was sort of this experience of feeling alone in a crowd, if you know what I mean. I knew the man was behind me but was too scared to look back more than once to check. It felt like an eternity. But I finally saw Tim, walking towards me on the sidewalk. We were both very young but as tall, over 6 feet. I felt a wave of relief as he came to my side. He told me he took a knife from the kitchen to defend us in case. Our house was right ahead. We walked quickly inside and locked the door. With the lights off, we looked out the window for the man, but he was nowhere in sight. Last year, I moved to another city after finishing high school. I assessed several college options and decided on one that would have me move roughly 3 hours. I found an apartment where I would be able to live without roommates, and that was in a safe part of town with reasonable rent. It was close to some attractions in the city, which was an added bonus to me as it would still allow me to have a reasonable social life. For the first 4 months or so, it was great. There were absolutely no problems or safety concerns of any sort. And I managed to become good friends with a guy who studied at the same college as me. He coincidentally lived around 5 minutes away from me, so we would often hang out at each other's place. One night just as winter started, he called me over to play video games and hang out. We had a pretty chill night, drank a few beers, had a good few laughs, and enjoyed ourselves. At around 1 a.m. we decided to call it a wrap, and I headed home to my apartment. When I got back home, I decided to head out to the balcony that overlooked the entrance of my building to smoke a cigarette. I vividly remember looking around and seeing absolutely nobody. It was a cold winter night and it wasn't the weekend, so understandably everybody was at home. Besides the usual car or two passing by, it was dead quiet. Once I finished my cigarette, I decided to call it a night and got ready for bed. I was understandably confused when I heard a short ring on my doorbell. I stood in the center of my room for a solid few seconds as confusion and a little bit of fear set in. I snapped out of it and decided to tiptoe to my door and to just try and hear if anyone was outside. My immediate thought was that my friend came over to drop off something that I might have forgotten, but I thought to myself that he would have texted me or called. I probably listened for half a minute or so when the person once again ringed the doorbell and softly knocked a few times. I was stood still and didn't want to make a sound so that I wouldn't give away the fact that I was at the door. I heard the stranger pacing around the apartment for a few seconds before he stopped. I waited for any sort of noise, but it was quiet. That was when I decided to look at the peephole to see that he hopefully had left. I picked up the cover of the peephole and took a look. My legs pretty much went numb as I saw a hooded figure looking straight into the peephole. He was holding the zipper of his hoodie so as to cover his face. All I could really make out was his forehead and eyes. He must have either heard me lift the cover or my heavy breathing, because right away he moved from the peephole and said, "I know you're at the door." By this point I was pretty much shivering in fear, but mustered up the courage to say, "I'm calling the cops, man." He laughed and said, "Sure thing, big guy." He proceeded to wipe away the door handle with his sleeve before walking off. I understandably called the police. When they came over, they informed me that I wasn't the only one. He had been doing this for at least a month, and they suspected him of at least one home invasion where a father chased him out the house. I crashed at my friend's house for around a week or so after this before going back into my apartment. It's been a year, and I've never heard of any news about him. He could have been arrested by now, but as far as I know, he hasn't been. I find it more likely that he simply moved to a different area. I'm not sure if he had any violent intent or not, but either way, let's seriously not meet again. My husband and I have recently been discussing about moving into a new home for both of us. After a long search of finding the perfect one, we found an apartment that wasn't far away from ours. Not soon after, we packed our things and arrived to our forever home, or so we thought. When we entered the house, the first thing we saw was a little note on the shoe cabinet. I took my shoes off and sat on the couch to read the note, and I noticed it was from a previous tenant. It read, "Hello. I suppose you are moving into this apartment, and let me tell you, it's a very lovely home. It may give you chills the first few moments, but trust me, you will get used to this house in no time. Before you continue living here, you must provide to a few rules around here. The first rule is to never even think about using the elevator from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. It's a strange rule, but don't attempt to do it. The second rule is to never open the door to anyone. The only exceptions are the mailman and the landlord, but the landlord almost never comes. It's like he doesn't exist. The third rule is to ignore the window wiper that comes every weekend, and do not let him come in for a drink or anything. The fourth rule is to always pay the bills. It sounds ridiculous because it's the most important thing of owning an apartment. In my 20 years of experience in this apartment, I only dealt with him once, and after that, I never forgot to pay the bills. Oh, and the mailman comes here to drop the mail off every morning at 6:20 sharp. Don't be shy to greet him. He's a nice guy. I hope you enjoy your stay here." My first instinct was to throw the paper in the trash, thinking it was just some prank or something, but the letter gave me chills for a moment and made me rethink my thoughts. I didn't throw the paper away, but I just brushed it off and completely forgot about it. I went to sleep and felt amazing in my new home. The next morning at around 6:33, I suddenly woke up and realized that the mailman already came. "I really snoozed off and didn't even greet him," I said. As expected, my mail was waiting for me outside my door. My husband went off to work, so I was completely alone, and I'm not gonna lie, I was getting chills being alone. A few hours pass by, and I suddenly hear a knock on my balcony windows. I quickly peek through the balcony doors to see who it was, and it was the window cleaner the letter told me about. I suddenly remember the information the letter told me. While sitting on the couch, I start hearing banging on my balcony windows. I realized that a strained, manly voice was shouting, "Hey, can you get me some beer or something? I'm thirsty." I froze for a second and didn't know what to do. In the end, I was just awkwardly sitting on my couch waiting for him to go. And he did. I'm not complaining though, my windows were sparkly clean. In the meantime, I was just washing up and packing the leftover things from yesterday. After doing some work around the house, I glance at my phone and discover that my husband didn't come home yet, even if his shift ended 2 hours ago. The sudden thought gets to me. His work shift starts at 4 a.m., so he probably used the lift around 3 to 3:30 a.m. Oh no, this can't be right.